Salam sejahtera, anda bersama saya Cynthia Eng dalam agenda AWANI. Pada Ahad, Sultan Muhammad V umum meletak jawatan sebagai Yang di-Pertuan Agong ke-15 berkuat kuasa serta-merta. Dan baginda hanya pegang jawatan 2 tahun daripada tempoh 5 tahun yang sepatutnya dipegang oleh baginda. Dan situasi ini tidak pernah berlaku dalam sejarah diraja Malaysia. Dan sudah tentunya persoalan ialah apakah implikasi berdasarkan sistem raja berperlembagaan Malaysia dan juga sistem demokrasi berparlimen di negara ini, dan juga kita fahami apakah proses seterusnya untuk menentukan siapa yang bakal dipilih sebagai Yang di-Pertuan Agong ke-16. Dan untuk menjawab persoalan-persoalan ini bersama saya di studio hari ini ialah Profesor Emeritus Datuk Dr. Shad Saleem Faruqi, pakar perlembagaan negara, dan beliau juga memegang kerusi Tunku Abdul Rahman di Fakulti Undang-Undang Universiti Malaya. Dan seterusnya saya ingin meneruskan rancangan ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Thank you so much, Prof. Shad, for making our way here to AWANI again. Now, this situation regarding the Sultan Muhammad V is the very first time that a monarch has stepped down before completing his 5-year term in a unique Raja Perlembagaan in Malaysia. No reason was given for his resignation. Within the constitutional monarchy system practiced in Malaysia, if you can share with us, what are the implications, if any, to how the administration of the country will be run?
Well, let me begin by saying this, Cynthia, that there's not much to worry about. The situation is without doubt unprecedented, but it is in no way a constitutional crisis. It doesn't affect the administration of the affairs of the state for a number of reasons. First, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is a constitutional monarch. Under Article 40, Clause 1 and 40, Clause 1A, he has to act on advice. He's head of the state, but he's not head of government. As they say, he reigns, he does not rule. So the affairs of the state can still continue even if the Yang di-Pertuan Agong either is sick or is on leave or has resigned, or most amazingly in the Malaysian constitution, if he has been dismissed by the Conference of Rulers. The reason I say that is because our constitution is unique in another way. We have a provision for a deputy king. In England, they don't have a deputy queen, but we have a deputy king. And the deputy king will then step into the shoes and fill the breach if for any reason the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is unable to perform his function. A third factor is this, that on the issue of resignation, actually the constitution contemplates that. There is an Article 32, Clause 3, which provides for resignation. In fact, there is an Article 32, Clause 3 and 38, Clause 6, which even provide for the dismissal of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. So our constitution was unique, was wise in contemplating these situations. And finally, may I just in a comparative way point out to you, in other countries too, heads of state often step down. We all know the instance involving Edward VIII, 1936, who stepped down because he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, who happened to be non-royal, non-British, and a divorcee, which the then establishment found was objectionable. So he gave up his throne to marry the lady he loved. The government went on. In fact, he himself signed the bill for his abdication, His Majesty's Declaration of Abdication Act. We all know that in the United States, the President Richard Nixon, in 1974, I think, he resigned. The government went on.
So, Prof. Shad, it's interesting that you mentioned that within the Constitution there is a provision for resignation of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, which is clearly quite different if you look at how international media they are reporting that abdication. Is there a difference in the context of Malaysia's unique system?
Sure, it's not abdication because he's still the Sultan of Kelantan. He has only resigned his job, which was a 5-year job at the federal level. but his term as Sultan of Kelantan is unaffected. In fact, the Constitution of Malaysia, the Federal Constitution, in Article 71 is very clear that when it comes to the position of a Sultan in his state, the federal government cannot interfere. Article 71. In fact, even the Conference of Rulers cannot interfere. The only authority that has the power to affect a Sultan's position is the Council of Succession. In Kelantan, they say the Majlis Parajaan Negeri. So this is not abdication. This is a case of resignation from a temporary rotational 5-year position.
Okay. Now, speaking of the rotational 5-year basis, Malaysia has probably one of the most unique monarchy systems in the world, in which the king is elected to serve the country on a rotational basis of 5 years. It can help us understand provisions within the constitution in terms of whether an Agong choose to resign or not. Is there a consensus that goes into the decision making? How does it work?
Well, the resignation is obviously his own decision. The constitution is silent on whether the Majlis could refuse to accept. I presume that's possible, but if a king or any office holder insists that he or she must step down, then there's nothing that can be done. However, when it comes to choosing his successor, there of course the Majlis has very wide discretion. The Majlis Raja Raja has very wide discretion. However, the constitution provides a lot of guidelines. In 1957, according to the seniority of the sultans, seniority not based on age, but on when they ascended to their throne. So seniority determined their precedence. That precedence was there. The top on the list was Johor, then Pahang. But Sultan of Johor rejected. Sultan of Pahang also, for various reasons, was not offered. So then the throne was offered to Negeri Sembilan as our first young di-Pertuan Agong. And then from that point on, actually, every other sultan on the list of precedents was given a chance on a rotational basis. And we followed that through the first 9, which was completed in 1994. And in 1994, number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, we have faithfully followed. So actually the Majlis Raja Raja has a discretion to refuse to follow the list on 3 grounds. Number 1, if the Sultan is a minor. Secondly, if the Sultan refuses to take on the position. Thirdly, for reasons of infirmity of mind or body, or for any other cause, which is very wide. For any other cause, the Majlis Raja Raja is of the opinion that Sultan is unsuitable to serve. They have not, however, exercised this power ever in 61 years. But the power is there. May I also point out to you, the Constitution gives other guidelines in the 3rd schedule, but they have not been, it's not been necessary to follow them. In general, the Majlis Raja Raja has very wide discretion to choose which Sultan to offer the position of the young di-Pertuan Agong, but they have not generally interfered with the precedents that already existed in 1957.
Okay. Help us understand a bit more the role of the Conference of Rulers, Majlis Raja Raja, and the powers of Agong. Malaysia is a constitutional monarchy.
Yes.
At the same time, we are also a parliamentary democracy.
Yes.
Help us understand the spirit of law and the separation of powers, and how this would reflect into the selection of the next young di-Pertuan Agong.
Yeah. Well, in the selection of the young di-Pertuan Agong, the other institutions, executive, judiciary, have no role. Also, as we discussed earlier, the Constitution gives the power to the Majlis Raja Raja. Now, what's the position of the Majlis Raja Raja in relation to the young di-Pertuan Agong? some people will say the king is at the apex of the legal hierarchy because he's the head of the state. But then the fact also is that the king can be dismissed by the conference of rulers. So I would think that in this country, with our unique constitution, it's a little bit difficult to say who or which is the highest authority. For diplomatic purposes, for protocol purposes, it's obviously the young di-Pertuan Agong. But we have to bear in mind that the young di-Pertuan Agong is subject to a certain amount of control or supervision by his brother rulers, but not by any one ruler, but by the rulers collectively.
Okay.
In the sense that they can advise him, they can caution him, they can warn him, and in the last resort, they may even dismiss him if he does not live up to the expectations which a monarch ought to live up to.
Okay. Well, we'll have to take this discussion for the to the first commercial break. But certainly the question right now is who will be the next in line to the throne, and that we will discuss not who, but rather the process of selecting and what will happen in between the selection and to the swearing-in ceremony of our 16th young di-Pertuan Agong. We'll be back shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back to Agenda AWANI. Joining me today is Prof. Shad, a constitutional law expert. Our discussion is regarding the resignation of the 15 young di-Pertuan Agong, Sultan Muhammad V. Of course, speculation has been rife regarding his successor. So we understand the heads of the 9 royal household will meet on January 24th to select a new king among them, and new king will be sworn in on 31st January. That is what has been expected. The question is, what's next? What is the process in the next couple of weeks? The decision making within the Conference of Rulers, what goes into the consideration?
You have already mentioned that the Majlis Raja Raja is scheduled to meet on January 24th.
Yeah.
Now, that itself is a step forward. That reduces one uncertainty, because one question many people ask is there a time limit between the death or resignation or dismissal of a king and the ascendancy of the next one? In our constitution, there is no time limit. When I look at the last 15 kings and their ascendancy to the throne, I have noticed that in some cases up to 23, 24 days took place between death or the end of term and the new monarch that came on. So there is no time limit. However, it's very useful to hear that their majesties have already decided on January 24th. Now, on the list of precedents and on the rotational list of precedents, Pahang is next on line. Then there is
Sultan of Johor.
His Majesty Sultan of Johor, and then there is Perak.
Yeah.
Sultan of Perak is already our Timbalan Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Many people say, why doesn't the Timbalan ascend to the throne? Here again, we are unique. In our country, the Timbalan does not automatically become the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The Timbalan's term is coterminous with the term of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. So when the Yang di-Pertuan Agong's term comes to an end, actually the Timbalan's term would also come to an end. But in this particular case, since there is a vacancy, the Timbalan will be acting as the Yang di-Pertuan Agong till a new king is appointed. Now, we understand that His Majesty the Sultan of Pahang is ill, and it is possible that he may abdicate, in which case his crown prince, the regent, will take on the position of the Sultan. And while time is a real problem here, between now and 24th, only about, it's less than 2 weeks.
Yes.
Nevertheless, I think this may be enough time for a new Sultan in Pahang and for the Majlis Raja Raja to give a chance to the new Sultan of Pahang to become the young di-Pertuan Agong. So that's one possibility. Second one, of course, is the Sultan of Johor. Johor has had a tradition of once in a while rejecting. In 1957, Johor rejected. I understand that somewhere in between also there were occasions when Sultan of Johor did not accept the invitation to become the young di-Pertuan Agong. So we do not know how His Majesty will accept an offer if an offer is made. Then there is, of course, the Sultan of Perak. So no guesses can be made here because there are no rules of the thumb. Ultimately, it's the discretion of His Majesty, of their Majesties, the Conference of Rulers.
Well, under the Majlis Raja-Raja, there are also other states that without a monarchy. For example, the governors of Penang, Melaka, Sabah, Sarawak.
Yes.
Even though they are in the Council of Rulers, do they have any say in terms of selecting who is the next young di-Pertuan Agong?
The governors of Penang, Melaka, Sabah, Sarawak are members of the Conference of Rulers only when policy and political issues are discussed. But when it is the election of the young di-Pertuan Agong, the election of the deputy young di-Pertuan Agong, or the dismissal of the young di-Pertuan Agong, the four governors have absolutely no say. They are not members. Neither does the Prime Minister or any members of the cabinet have a say. So that's actually a total prerogative of their Majesties, the 9 Malay rulers.
Well, this is certainly a situation, a test of protocols, if I may put it, the election of the next king. To have it done in an orderly manner and to ensure the succession, it's very important to provide the assurance of stability to the constitutional monarchy. What are the processes that have to be in place to ensure that? If you can share with us within the constitution, this has never happened before. What are your thoughts?
Well, Cynthia, the resignation, of course, is a matter of sadness. At the same time, one looks at the silver lining here. The silver lining is this: our constitution works. Peaceful transfer of power is possible at the highest level. The Majlis Raja-Raja is fully cognizant of the matter and taking action. The deliberations are confidential. How often they have met, what was the agenda, did they play a role in the resignation, we do not know. But the fact of the matter is that they are seized of the matter. They are seizing the bull by the horns. So things are working. In that respect, actually, I would like to say the Constitution is working. There is no constitutional crisis whatsoever. And may I point out to you, once earlier in the state of Kelantan, there was a situation, in fact even more grave, where the Sultan, due to ill health, was removed from office and a new Sultan took over, and life went on, Constitution went on working.
Well, this situation also calls to more interest in the role of our young di-Pertuan Agong. Now, for a lot of us, the younger generation especially, we look at the young di-Pertuan Agong as more of a ceremonial function, but in fact, under the Constitution, the young di-Pertuan Agong sits right at the top in terms of position, and then his Raja Permaisuri. Tell us a bit more about what...
Yeah, thank you. It's a very large question, Cynthia, as to what's the role and position and importance of the young di-Pertuan Agong in the constitutional setup. Let me just make some broad generalizations. In general, the young di-Pertuan Agong is a constitutional head. As I said earlier, he is head of the state but not head of the government. His position is somewhat like the position of the British Queen. Whenever in the Constitution we come across the words young di-Pertuan Agong, it is quite reasonable to interpret the words young di-Pertuan Agong to mean young di-Pertuan Agong acting on advice under Article 40, Clause 1. In other words, he acts on advice. Decisions are made, members of the cabinet, for example, are chosen not by the young di-Pertuan Agong, though he appoints. They are chosen by the Prime Minister. However, having said that, let me point out, there are some areas, critical, crucial areas, where the young di-Pertuan Agong can alter the course of history. For example, if after an election there is a hung parliament, no party or coalition has a majority, the power of appointing the Prime Minister rests in the hands of the young di-Pertuan Agong. If the Prime Minister asks for a premature dissolution, the king has a constitutional power to say no. Now, no doubt the king is bound by conventions. For example, on the dissolution, if a Prime Minister is firmly in the saddle, if he has a comfortable majority, if there is no emergency in the country, if the economy is not in shambles, then I would think under constitutional conventions, the king will not stand in the way of a Prime Minister calling an early election. But the fact of the matter is that under the law, the king can delay or can even say no to a premature dissolution. There are a number of other areas where the king can influence the course of the nation's history in a number of appointments. The king is required, for example, to ensure that the appointee enjoys public confidence. For example, the Election Commission. Now, what do those words mean? The king must ensure that the appointee enjoys public confidence. I think the king can advise, the caution, delay, and ask the Prime Minister, are you sure you want to appoint a person who is so partisan, who is not going to enjoy public confidence? Also, please bear in mind, in relation to some appointments, top appointments, the king has to consult with the Majlis Raja Raja. If the Majlis is deeply averse against a particular nominee, what's the role of the king? The king would be on the horns of a dilemma. On the one hand, the Prime Minister's advice is binding on him. On the other hand, the Majlis has strongly advised him. So I think in these areas, the Prime Minister would definitely, the young di-Pertuan Agong would definitely be able to influence the course of history. And we know of instances where the young di-Pertuan Agong has acted not on the advice of the Prime Minister, but on the advice of his brother rulers.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Prof. Shad, for your insights. I suppose you will have more clarity on who will be the next young di-Pertuan Agong on January 24th. You've been watching Agenda AWANI. My name is Cynthia Ng, and thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Prof.